If this is your first time tuning into Okami, welcome. This is part of a full year, all of 2024, we're going to be doing Japanese history. And we're starting with Okami because, one, it's a really brilliant snapshot of sort of Japanese visual culture as we tend to imagine it in modernity. So a lot of influence from late Edo period stuff, a lot of influence from things that were impactful to European art history. But also, it's got this mythological narrative that sort of prefigures all of our historical written sources about the beginnings of Japanese history. So that makes it a really good starting point. But since it's a mytho-history, right? It's mythological and folkloric and not actually real history. Figured, we should maybe take a look at the actual history that is nominally in the same period as these mythological narratives. And so today we're going to actually open up, not with the game, we're going to let the music just kind of tick on here. But we are instead going to open with PowerPoint content. That's right. You know it, you love it. We are back with more PowerPoints. And so we're gonna have an introduction to the Jomon period, the first identifiable phase of Japanese history. Before we get into the game, I had a lot of fun researching this. There's some really cool archaeological sites, and that makes me very happy to share it with you all. So, I hope you all enjoy. If you do enjoy this, of course, make sure you hit the follow button to be notified for all of the historical content we do here at Ludo History. And, hang out in chat, right? Post emotes. If you don't feel like you have a lot of stuff to ask, questions to ask, stuff to add to the conversation, just want to hang out, post emotes because they're cute and delightful. And we've got an Edo period depressed frog that goes pop. If you want to support the channel, though, consider subscribing, or you can head over to Patreon, or for just $2 a month, you can help make all of this happen. We also have more details about what this year-long project is going to look like through over on the website at ludohistory.com to take a look at the plans throughout the year for what we're going to do for Japanese history. So, without further ado, let's hop in and get started with our PowerPoint and our introduction to Jomon, Japan. This is a very short intro, just as a heads up, chat. Since we are learning as we go, this is a very short intro, and if I screw things up, make sure you tell me. Right, like, tell me right away. Call me out on this so that we can correct things together, because we have that power. Anyway, though, the story of human settlement in Japan actually begins in the about 15,000 years ago, near the end of the Pleistocene. So, in that period, the Japanese archipelago is really not an archipelago, it's a couple of islands that are mostly connected. So we've got them in the dark gray. We have the modern borders, or the modern landmasses, and the light brown color actually indicates the Pleistocene era coastline. So sea levels were much lower, and so people both from modern Korea and from modern Siberia were able to cross down from both directions into Japan. The Tsugaru Strait was still intact, and the Tsushima Strait was still intact, but it's a very short hop. So they come in from both directions about 15,000 years ago, following migratory, fairly large animal herds. And then the Younger Dryas happens. And for anyone who doesn't know, the Younger Dryas is a period of, geologically speaking, extremely rapid warming. Hello, Rain. It's good to see you. Now, it's a geologic scale, rapid warming. This is not actually a rapid scale. It's a in the space between about 15,000 years ago and 12,000 years ago, right, the sea levels rise by a total of a couple of meters. It's at tops probably maxes out at 5 to 10 centimeters per year. So, like, we're not talking catastrophic, instantaneous overnight flooding. We are, however, talking the sea levels going enough that Hokkaido, Honshu, Kyushu, and the other islands that were still islands in the Pleistocene all get cut off from each other and from the Asian mainland. Turns out all those big migratory herds of the Ice Age cannot survive on mountainous islands, and so they all die off. That forces human settlements to move to the coastline and sort of readjust as sea levels rise, and become increasingly reliant on coastal maritime food sources, i.e. fish. So, the earliest stages of the Jomon period are incredibly fish-heavy, and so we get Stone Age littoral hunter-gatherer societies for the next roughly 10,000 years. Don't you mean when the sun exploded and destroyed the not ancient alien civilization? Yep, definitely. So, to take a very rough look at what period we're looking at in our grand timeline, right? Human settlement starts right around here at 15,000 BC, and the Jomon period persists until about 300 BC. When it is replaced by the Yayoi, who we will talk about later. So the Jomon shell middens, so massive. Oh, the shell piles are real impressive, actually. That makes sense. We can get somewhat more precise here. So roundabout, right, sea levels have risen, kind of settled in by about 8,000 BC, so the coastline of Japan's pretty static from that point forward. Temperature continues to warm, though, and we get increased abundance up until about 3000 BC, and population growth mirroring that. We get rice introduced around 1000 BC. At the same time, we have actually climate cooling and more regional separation and diversification going on into the Yayoi. Ireland, Japan, so many shellfish. Infinity shellfish. So, we've got a more detailed timeline in just a moment, but firstly I wanted to talk about what makes the Jomon. Because the word Jomon actually means, like, corded. And so it's actually named after the style of pottery. A fabulous example is this kind Doki from the Middle Jomon, about 3000 BC. The Med owns it, but these are the pots we have been breaking in Okami the entire time. So if anyone's curious, we are doing catastrophic news to northern Japanese material culture. So it is a corded-ware culture. There is no pottery wheel, so instead you hand make a roll of clay, and you mix it with crushed shells, because you've got infinity shellfish, chestnut husks, and whatever else you do, and you wrap that up, and you construct that, you smooth it out, you engrave it, and then you throw the whole thing into a bonfire. So this is fired, right? Jomon period pottery could be fired and actually glazed and enameled at temperatures of over 900 degrees Celsius in open-air bonfires, as early as about 14,000 years ago. That makes them one of the oldest pottery-producing cultures in the world. Yeah, fired in an open fire, at massively hot degrees. Yeah, it's real cool. It's real cool. So, being archaeologists, of course, people named the culture after the pottery, or after the name assigned to the pottery. You can actually see the cording still, if you look real close on these. All those little lines are remnants of the cording that had gone partially smoothed over. But, of course, this is a period of 10,000 years occupying a very large archipelago. And so there's incredible regional variation, especially as the period goes on. The most elaborate styles are found in northeastern Japan, in Tohoku, so northern Honshu, the main island, and southern Hokkaido. Hokkaido actually develops ceramics really late, relative to Honshu and the Kanto Plain, but once they have it, it persists for longer than basically anywhere else. Let's get a more detailed breakdown, though, because there is a really stable, well-agreed on, and stupidly named chronology for the Jomon period. We have the incipient, the initial, the early, the middle, the late, and the final. And I'm sure these make more sense in Japanese, but it sounds like the very, very early, the very early, the early, the not early, the late, and the later than late. Thank you. Real descriptive, y'all. But as we go through this, sea level stabilized around 8000 BC. Population grows, estimated at a peak of about 200,000 people across the archipelago by about 1500 BC. And then population declines again as climate cools going into the Yayoi period. Though, I do want to note, that population decline is regionally specific. Right? Because around 1000 BC, in the final Jomon, rice is introduced from Korea. And so southwestern Japan, in Kyushu, has actual population growth, while Tohoku and Hokkaido have population decline. So again, another case where we have this very regionally specific nitty-gritty that the overall trend obscures. You're so waiting for me to slip up. Nope, not gonna happen. I refuse. We'll wait till we get to the presentation on the Yayoi. Anyway, anonymous gifter, thank you for the tier 1 gift sub to Lizard in the Dark. Enjoy the emotes, Liz. Alright, let's talk more about the material culture, because there is a whole bunch. This is another great example of late Jomon Tohoku region pottery. I mean, look at it's so cool. Look at how cool this pottery is. That's just fabulous. Of course, since this is a littoral culture, right, we also have a ton of bone and stoneware tools. So you have hunting spears, which are going to be made out of flint knapping, like everywhere else. You're up in the mountains, you have food processing centers, like specifically for crushing herbs and chestnuts. Herbs, berries, and chestnuts, so you have mortars and pestles and stuff like that. And along the coastlines, you have bone fish hooks and serrated harpoons to catch some of the larger fish in Japanese waters. A lot of it is also shellfish, but these are obviously intended for not shellfish. These are intended for fishbone middens, of which there are piles tens of, meters thick. They are incredibly thick. Roughly 12,000 years ago were the last mainland Japanese tigers. Raptorus, that's terrifying news. Do we know what kind of herbs? I'm sure somebody knows. I am not somebody. In the later Jomon periods, though, we also get the development of things that will continue to be very famous and important for a very, 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 very long time. So both of these are late Jomon, probably ritual objects. Hashtag archaeologist speak. These are the earliest Paleolithic magatamas. So, these will continue to be produced into the late Kofun period, and continue to form Nara period imperial regalia. But they are teardrop-ish, cashew-shaped, right? Teardrop-shaped or cashew-shaped beads. They're not the first type of bead of semi-precious stone beads produced in the Jomon period, but they are at least the most famous. And this little guy is called a domu. And this little guy is actually a girl. So, girls are allowed to be little guys too. So, domu figures are overwhelmingly supposed to be female. At least, they're typically interpreted as such because they often have very exaggerated hips and very exaggerated breasts. So, very common Neolithic phenomenon to have these humanoid figures exaggerate body parts. The interpretation of these is very dubious, though. Apart from being incredibly charming, proposals have ranged to these giant eyes being snow goggles, and therefore these representations of Proto-Ainu people. In truth, they're probably just eyes. They're just very big eyes. But are these, fertility, medicinal, something else, all of the above? It's not super clear. The answer is probably they are different things to different parts of Japan at different times. As with usual, the answer is nuanced and complicated. Still though, as you might guess from being, 10,000 or 12,000 years before present to 2,300 years before present, there are no written sources about any of these guys, and this is not a literate culture. So, our information on their political organization is incredibly scant. There's been broadly division into like 3 regional groups with more similar material cultures in sort of southern Hokkaido, northern Tohoku, the Kanto Plain, and central Honshu, and then southwestern Honshu and Kyushu, and a little bit the Ryukyu Islands. People like it when women pretty? Yeah, but there's also a lot, Liz, like, some of the things people have noted is that some of them appear to have been deliberately smashed. And a different group of them appear to have been depicting pregnant women. So, is this... that makes it more complicated to tell? And also, northern Hokkaido, or northern Tohoku makes hundreds of these. Like, there are hundreds of Domu finds in northern Japan. And then a handful in southeastern Japan, hundreds of miles away from the northern branches. Just... there's enough going on there that I do think saying that these are in some way supposed to be symbolic and involved in ritual, and not just decorative, I think holds a lot of water. But the usage is so diversified that it's hard to say. Can we get a map of where these regions are? We sure can. So, let's zoom out. Helpfully, UNESCO declared the Jomon sites of northern Tohoku and southern Hokkaido to be World Heritage Sites collectively, all 17 of them, in 2021. And there's an incredible site with hugely detailed archives and a compilation of a lot of the interpretive information. So, go over here. But, so when I say Tohoku and southern Hokkaido, I mean this cluster right here. Right from down to about Sendai. So these top handful of prefectures, and southern Hokkaido up to about Sapporo. Right, there's a lot fewer sites in central and northern Hokkaido, so, when I say the Kanto Plain, I mean Yamatai, so the area from Tokyo around to Nagoya. That is its own thing. And then the island of Kyushu and southern Honshu and Shikoku make up cluster number 3. And then, there's the Ryukyu Islands, which are all over the place. All along this area. Okinawa's out here. So, they're doing their own thing. That's a little bit different and more complicated. So yeah. Cluster 1, Cluster 2, Cluster 3. Okay. So apart from those clusters, we really don't have a lot of information, and that is purely off of material culture. We can only really speculate about what that actually does in terms of political organization. What we can say is that at the peak, when Japanese population is at the highest point of the Jomon period, we have communities of up to about 500 individuals, both along the coastlines and up into more mountainous regions in central Japan. There's some evidence of, like, proto-agricultural or arboreal cultivation, especially of chestnut, but it seems to be really, really limited and restricted to individual communities and not some sort of, like, widespread trans-archipelago practice. There also is, however, a lot of contact with Korea and China, especially here in Group 3 and Kyushu and Southern Honshu. Right, the Strait of Tsushima is not very big, and so they are plenty competent enough seafarers to make the hop through Tsushima across here and have contact with prehistoric Korean peoples. So there is a lot of material cultural similarities, and in fact, the major developments that end the Jomon period will come from Korea, and that's something that we'll get to in just a little bit. What's also remarkable about the Jomon period is that there seems to be a really, really low rate of inter-community violence. Not none, but we are fortunate in that there has been a lot of very government-funded archaeological work. And that's great news for us, because that means that we can actually learn a lot about what's going on. And when we take a look at it, at most, only about 3% of excavated skeletons from any time period show marks of, like, man-made weapon violence. That doesn't mean that there is no warfare, right? It's possible that simply skeletal material didn't survive, but in surveys often of over 1,000 individuals excavated, an extremely low number show signs of, like, injury that can be plausibly interpreted as violence. That's remarkable. Like, that is historically incredibly uncommon. But opens up some thoughts of, some interpretation on, firstly, the availability of resources in prehistoric Japan, i.e., there is so much that there is not really a lot of competition, even as the population grows. And two, the idea that there is a social organization that has a lot of contact with other regions, but does so in a way that doesn't really have conceptions of territory disputes, and things that will later on lead to perpetual, kind of long-running states of civil violence in Japanese history. So that cultural space, and that conception of community and of polity just doesn't exist yet. And that's really neat. Like, I don't really have a lot to say about that besides that's really neat and that's really remarkable. In terms of living, they live in these semi-buried pit houses, like what we see here reconstructed at Sanai Maruyama in Tohoku. And they have... The settlements do grow and change over the period, with kind of central religious or central ritual sites sort of emerging around them. Let's see if I can remember which one has that. It is this one, I think. Show... Nope, it is not this one. Tragic. There was one of the sources I had actually had a map of what some of these settlements actually roughly look like, but I have lost it, and so we simply shan't worry about it for now. Anyway, speaking of these sites, clearly there is some sort of religious practice, but there's nothing that is identifiable in this period as what the 8th century AD will come to understand and codify as Shinto. Dogu, right, the little dudes, the good figures, have been generally interpreted as medicinal or fertility icons, potentially like you create the figurine of a person, and then you injure that. So that the injury, right, whatever spirit causes the injury, will bypass the person and go inhabit the dogu. And if it inhabits the dogu, the person is fine. There are also ritual practice at stone circles in the middle Jomon. These coincide with pit graves, but in later periods, the cemetery and the stone circle get removed from each other in the final Jomon. We also have children buried in pots. Like, you create a big giant pot, like this one. You put a deceased child in it, and then you bury that instead of some sort of coffin or stone internment, like what you might see in Neolithic periods elsewhere. This is not super weird or surprising, but it is clearly a sign of very, very early ritual practices around burial, and it's neat. Unfortunately, of course, a lot of it is deeply, deeply mysterious, and a lot of the scholarship on it is in Japanese, which I do not read. So, we shall simply have to leave it as there has been a lot of archaeological work to try and understand it, but there is also a lot of mystery and uncertainty left. So but that's it being progresses, obviously, with development and regional variation and a lot of nuance for about 10,000 years. But after about 1000 BC, things start changing. Firstly, rice cultivation is introduced into Kyushu from Korea, along with an influx of new people. That's a big deal. Rice thrives in the climate of southern Japan, and it takes off rapidly as the agricultural staple. Bamboo cultivation is also introduced shortly thereafter, and it has major changes on both, obviously, the ecology of Japan, but also the social structure, because that allows for the Jomon were already sedentary, but this allows for much more polity-like communities and claims on land. Additionally, Korea is in the Bronze Age after 1000 BC, and so introduces bronze working into Japan, and so you get big bronze creations like this one in the early Yayoi. This is, it appears, largely a non-violent transition, though. There are some scholars like Kobayashi who argues for things of Jomon resistance and Yayoi aggression, though skeletal archaeology, again, doesn't really show much violence. This is done... Kobayashi primarily works by material culture in the styles and forms that he considers Jomon versus Yayoi, and by doing a lot of very careful comparative dating, proposes a period of, like, Jomon intensification at the very end of the final Jomon that he can interpret as resistance. Whether or not that's actually resistance or not is a bit... But what is clear is that there is much more rapid adoption of Korean technologies, cultivation and material culture, and influx of people from Korea in southwestern Japan into the Kanto Plain and the Yamatai. And as you get farther north into Tohoku and Hokkaido, there is much slower and more tentative adoption of these material cultures. And this seems to set up the regional conflicts that will define later periods of Japanese history for a good 1,000 years. And that's pretty cool. A Lonely Spaceborb, thank you for the 16 months of Prime as well. We're lovely to have you here, though I do like my bones. I prefer if you didn't steal them. Deal? I receive Prime Gaming subs, you receive non-essential bones only. So, this is not the time or place, anyway, to talk about the Yamato Izumo Ezo sort of space and conflict. That'll be something we do after we do Age of Empires 1. But even as at the end of the Jomon, right, around 300 BC, we already see these sort of regional distinctions that will continue to cause a lot of tension as more concrete political identity forms, and this idea of Yamato imperial culture and Yamato imperial expansion continues throughout the Kofun, the Yamato, and the Heian periods. There are a lot of good English resources on this, though. Right, the Metropolitan Museum of Art's essay on it is a fabulous breakdown on just the utterly charming material culture of the Jomon, and they also have ones on the Yayoi, but they have much fewer objects to talk about for it. It's a much shorter one, so that's a great place to take a look for a brief introduction. But really, I think the place. This is just the Japanese official tourism site. This is the wrong one. This is the place to go. Right, the Jomon Cultural Center at the Sanai Maruyama site in Tohoku is the premier interpretive resource for Jomon culture. They have done so much work. And the site, since it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site, it is available in great Oh, this is the one I was looking for. Perfect. When I was looking at remember when I said that there was a site that was resource that I had that talked about the actual settlement structure? There we go. So let's backtrack to that. And as evidence of how good this site is and how rich the resources are, here is their breakdown of their 17 archaeological sites that make up the World Heritage Site. So the oldest ones are just some houses. Then you separate residential and graves. Then you have the big shellfish dumps showing up in sort of the early Jomon after 5000 BC. Then you get ritual spaces emerge in the middle Jomon. And then you get sort of these big stone circle hubs showing up in the late and final Jomon periods, really sort of creating inter-community settlements instead of just a community does some sort of practice right in and of itself, and each community is doing its own thing. And it is really, really cool. We also get a climatological history, which is fantastic. Hey, look, you can see the Younger Dryas right there. Look at that change. And so I just cannot recommend this site enough if you are interested in Jomon culture and the archaeology of the Jomon period. They have so much information. They've got a not particularly well organized, but very resource rich digital archive attached to the World Heritage website. Obviously, a lot of the resources are in Japanese, so if you can read that, you're going to have a much better time than I will. But you've got so much information here on the organization and the resources available. So, you can just check that out by clicking the link there. And yeah, this presentation would not have been possible without the information put up by here and by the museums that do the cultural interpretive work for this UNESCO World Heritage Site. So people were like, Gobekli Tepe, as in creating different groups collaborating to create a single ritual site held in common? Yeah, basically. Right, that's super common by this period, obvious. right? I mean, Stonehenge is also that, but there's hundreds of, like, late Neolithic or early Bronze Age sites that all show the same pattern. So I think it's just a cross-culturally pretty common thing to see, hey, you know, we have rituals, and we all have similar rituals, well, let's collaborate and have these big stone circles, more or less shared in common. And yeah. So, that does our presentation on the historical background. Right, the actual history that's going on, instead of our folklore. But that's, like, it's such a good period. There's so much fascinating and beautiful material culture being made. I think that's really cool. Like, I have a great time with it. Even though we don't know a lot of details about the raw history of what's happening beyond the very broadest strokes of settlement development, climatic anomaly, and food waste, there is just a lot here to like. And yeah, we see by the late Jomon, right, by about 1500 BC, some of the things that will continue to be culturally really important and centerpieces of Japanese mytho-religious practice throughout the period. So as one great example, right, Izanagi gives to Amaterasu a necklace made out of Magatama beads. Well, Magatama beads are a Jomon development, right? So our Jomon ritualized / decorative / religious beadwork traditions persist into the historical period and then get retroactively assigned a mythological origin. And so we see a lot of that sort of negotiation and later peoples trying to deal with the material record of the past. And only kind of succeeding. Like, another example probably from the final Jomon, right, is Izanagi who travels to Yomi and then runs away because Izanami is scary. The Kojiki tells us that the passageway into Yomi that Izanagi blocks with a boulder is in Izumo Prefecture. Izumo Prefecture is right by Tohoku. It's not quite that far northwest, or northeast, but it's in that area. And in the early Kofun period, in the Kofun and early Yamato periods, I should say, the Yamatai Plain and Izumo were in conflict. And again, right, as I said earlier, the Kanto Plain and southwestern Japan adopt much more of this Bronze Age Yayoi culture much faster than Tohoku and southern Hokkaido. And so I think you can really say, right, that this mythological political boundary is a reflection of the cultural movements of the end of the Jomon period. Yeah, I mean, I did say it wasn't quite that far north. Let me pull over the map. Right, I mean, Izumo's down here. So, right, it's down here, but importantly, right, it is part of Region 1, right, it is the southern stretch of cultural Region 1 of the Jomon. Because there's a mountain range right here that causes a problem. Or, I'm not on the wrong page. Let's try that again. Ha, I'm good at this streaming thing. Right, so Izumo's down here. And so, right, we have that Region 1, which is Tohoku, and the western side of the mountains here. And then you have the southeastern side of the mountains down to over by Osaka as Region 2, and the plain of Kanto is right here. And then you have Region 3. So, right, there's a political dispute that runs right through the center here. And then you have this continued sort of relic. Now, Izumo... So, right, clearly Izumo is, like, more material culturally akin to Tohoku. And then the political boundary makes them all get turned Ezo or Amishi, like through here, all the way through here, all the way to here, depending on when you are and how far the empire has expanded. So, I mean, I stretched a little bit. But I do stand by my interpretation that I think there is a very real sort of development created. Oh, actually, I was just straight up wrong. I was thinking of the border up here. Sorry. I should retract everything I just said, because that is just straight up backwards. I was thinking of whatever province is right here whose name now escapes me. I was sure I had that right. I had looked this up, and then I was wrong. So we'll scratch the about 5 minutes there. And we'll stand by it being, related to... So Izumo's actually over here, so congratulations, the underworld is right here. Underworld's over here. I was just wrong. I was thinking of the boundary up here, which is, still, that's the other front of the big conflict. Is it clear I'm not an expert? Is it clear that I'm not an expert in this? I've done my homework, but we catch up together. So Sakurdos, thank you so much for calling me out on that and in helping me. Group 1, Group 2, so this is Group 3 in the late Jomon period. So, I mean, I think it still stands that, right, as we get group formation, right, we get Izumo as a boundary line with Korea. So, yeah, we'll scratch everything I just said. What I was thinking about is right here. And so there isn't so much a mythic thing, but in the Kofun, Yamato, and Nara periods, there's the warfare between here and here is very prominent, and I think that can be stretched all the way back to the final Jomon and the Yayoi as creating regional identities that will sort of gestate and maturate and turn into conflict later on. Bedroom Answer, hello to you as well. We were just finishing up a presentation on the actual archaeology of prehistoric Japan. So last time, you know, we talked about the mythology a little bit and the story of Amaterasu and Susanoo and Yamato no Orochi. Now we're talking about the Jomon period culture, and then I just made a pretty egregious error in the geography of Japan. So we are instead trying to recover from that. Anyway, so yeah, I mean, you still see these introduction, right? This contact point having impact. You have political formation in here in the Kofun, and then you have warfare going this direction and warfare going this direction that are both then attached to earlier material culture. Did we get to talk about Susanoo's connections to Korean metalworking and rice agriculture? We did a little bit. And specifically, you know, the fact that the Nihon Shoki and the Kojiki just disagree as to which brother is responsible for agriculture. The Nihon Shoki says it's Tsukuyomi that murders the goddess of agriculture. And the Kojiki says it's Susanoo. But the Nihon Shoki is the one that says that Susanoo goes to Korea. And the Kojiki just kinda doesn't mention that. Yay. We love contradictions. There's an additional myth in the Fudoki unrelated to the killing of the food goddess. Oh. If you have a link to that, we will take a look at that together, because I somehow whiffed that one completely. Hooray. Anywho, though, that does it for our PowerPoint. where Susanoo just plain teaches agriculture. I love that. Is this after he goes to Korea? But yeah. That is it for our PowerPointing stuff. So we're going to take a very brief ad break here so I can stand up, stretch, pour myself some more tea. And then we are going to hop into Okami and actually play the video game. I figured out what we're supposed to do, which is a big improvement over last time. And then we're going to see how far we can push on, have a great time, and do stuff. And by the way, Bad Romancer, we are going to spend a whole time just talking about people outside of Yamato, right? In a few weeks. Probably after we finish Age of Empires 1's Rise of the Yamato campaign, we're going to spend some time just looking at some resources together on the peoples who do not live in the Empire of Yamato. In the Nara period-ish, so around the 8th century AD. Because that's when the Ainu are going to be actually a recognizable group. The people of Ryukyu and Okinawa are going to have their own distinct material culture. And so we'll look at those later. Unfortunately, the Jomon, or I guess in some ways fortunately, the Jomon predates this cultural split. And these culture groups existing. In many ways, Jomon material culture is contiguous all the way through the Japanese archipelago, and the regional variations can just be traced, and so it seems to predate the Ainu people. Where the Ainu people come from? Grand old mystery. But they are not around in the early Holocene, so that's fine. Oof. There's only one English translation of... Oh boy, I'll see if I can find a copy of it during the ad break then. And if not, I'll just take your word for it. Okay, so, we shall let the music tick on here. And I shall give you all some questing snails. So do not go anywhere. Stand up, stretch, all that stuff. When we come back, we will have more and actual Okami.